The autumn colors stretch endlessly across the landscapes of Virginia and North Carolina, symbolizing the end of summer and the start of the harvest season for many farms in the region. In this episode, we will envision a new addition to the area, the reintroduction of mainline steam railroading along the Norfolk and Western Railroad tracks. This marks our second N&W RS episode in Season 2 of the Revival Steam podcast. I am Alec Butler, the host, sound editor, and narrator of this fictional railroad-related podcast, which tells stories about what future American revenue trains, pulled by new and improved steam locomotives, will look and sound like. In this episode, I continue to stand by my motto, all things originate from small beginnings. Last time, we began this journey with branch line locomotives. Now we will see the new, compact yet powerful N&W 080 switchers in action, paying tribute to their predecessors as the next in class. These engines were the last steam locomotives built for the N&W and mark the final steamers produced in North America. Additionally, the episode includes a bonus as we will visit the N&W main line for the first time. I will explain the route later. This event takes place during the week of Indigenous Peoples Day. It begins at the eastern end of the N&W in Norfolk, Virginia, where 080 locomotives will be switching grain and coal cars for local industries and loading facilities at the port. There will also be some switching of bio-coal hoppers, which are crucial for the future of steam locomotives. After Norfolk, we'll move to Roanoke for additional switching operations. This means steam activity in 2 yards across 2 cities on the same day. We'll also hear the sounds of steam engine switching in Williamson, West Virginia. While this event might seem dull to some rail fans, remember, I have a surprise I'll reveal later in the episode before we get to Williamson. It's an exciting sign of N&W's steam return, so sit back, grab a snack, and close your eyes. Imagine traveling into the future to listen to N&W switchers and some of the first steam locomotives on the N&W main line since 1960. Enjoy the experience. We will arrive at Norfolk International Airport on Sunday, October 12th, and stay at a comfortable hotel. Monday, October 13th, is Indigenous Peoples Day with cloudy weather. The first part of this episode will run about 28 to 29 minutes, showcasing 3 080 switchers operating in the NS Portlock Yard. These engines are Model S1A, built at Roanoke shops between 1951 and 1953. Notably, number 244 was the last steam locomotive made in the U.S., emerging in December 1953. Some of these engines were renumbered around 1959. For example, number 215 became number 290. It was the last N&W steamer to run under steam on May 7, 1960, marking the end of an era. No 080 switcher from the railroad has been preserved, but we imagine them returning in the future as tributes and next-in classes. Let's return to the story. The 080 tribute engines at the Portlock Yard are genuine tributes. Notably, one commemorates the last N&W steam engine. However, pinpointing which engine we hear in this sequence is challenging because it captures a busy Norfolk and Western, or N&W, switching day. First, we'll listen to tribute number 290, switching grain cars. Next, tribute number 292 is working the coal hoppers bound for ships at Lambert's Point near Norfolk. Lastly, tribute S1A number 293 operates in bio-coal fuels facilities and is setting out bio-coal hoppers to provide fuel for steam engines in the future. Though it may seem mundane, this marks another step in revitalizing N&W steam service. After this activity, we will have lunch and then proceed to Roanoke for the afternoon. As early evening approaches and the sun begins to set, we decide to make the most of the remaining daylight by listening to the sounds of steam switching activity in the Roanoke yard. 2 additional tribute NNW 080s are operating as NS Roanoke switcher jobs. UR-49 is powered by S1 number 284, a locomotive that represents 30 switchers the NNW bought in 1950 from the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad, retaining their original C&O numbers. These engines were built by Baldwin in 1948. The second 080 in the yard, working as NS UR-86, is a tribute to S1 number 232. We will enjoy 4 audio segments with fade-ins and fade-outs between them as these 2 yard engines work on this cool October evening. The next day of our adventure is Tuesday, October 14th, and it's time to reveal our episode bonus. We'll now observe the first operations on the actual Norfolk and Western main line. Well, nearly. The scene will take place along the Pumpkin Vine route, which was originally known as the Roanoke and Southern Railway, chartered in 1886. This railroad stretched 122 miles between Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and Roanoke to the north, completed in 1891, and merged into the N&W in 1911. The route features steep grades and many curves, earning its nickname Pumpkin Vine, reminiscent of a pumpkin stem. Regardless of what you call it, this marks the beginning of the new major mainline steam activity on the N&W. Our action starts at 10 a.m. with a 2-hour journey south to Winston-Salem to observe 2 steam trains at a grade crossing a few miles outside the city. The first train is Ennis Local Freight V79, operating only on weekdays from Payne, Virginia to North Winston Yards in Winston-Salem, covering around 200 miles. A long route for a local freight, but ideal for a large N&W engine like the one we see today. Tribute Y6A 2882, number 2158, built 1942 at the Roanoke shops for World War II traffic, symbolizes these 15 locomotives. Only number 2156 survives today, displayed in St. Louis, Missouri. We'll imagine hearing that engine later. For now, let's listen to Tribute number 2158 as it heads south on NSV 79, passing 2 crossings including ours, with a grand N&W hooter whistle. Enjoyed this first N&W mainline steam run past. The second train, the RS-related northbound Pumpkin Vine passenger train from Winston-Salem to Roanoke, will pass at the same spot as the previous one. By now, half an hour has elapsed. The locomotive hauling this, our first mainline N&W steam passenger train, is not the expected J-Class 4A4, as we will hear in later episodes. Instead, it is led by next-in-class 4A2 number 142. This engine is part of the streamlined K2 and K2A mountains, numbered 116 to 137, built by Brooks in 1919 and Baldwin in 1923. 142 belongs to the Baldwin Group, all of which were streamlined in the 1940s by N&W despite the coming diesel age. Unfortunately, all were retired between 1958 and 1959, but with number 142 here, they are starting to regain recognition. Listen to number 142 as she whistles for the crossing and pulls this short passenger train north to Roanoke. It's now 11:30 a.m. and we're heading north after a quick stop at a gas station. Suddenly, we notice smoke in the distance and rush ahead of the train to see it gliding down a grade. This scene unfolds at Walnut Cove Road in Walnut Cove, North Carolina. The train is a local freight, NSV 77, traveling from Winston-Salem to Bellows Creek. At the front is a Y-class engine, more recognizable than the Y6As. This is a tribute to Y6B 2882, number 2198, leading the train. Listen to the rods clank as the engine pulls the train north. It is 2:30 p.m. in Boone's Mill, Virginia, at milepost 21. We arrived from Winston-Salem about a half an hour earlier and had lunch around 1:30. Now we are about to observe two distinct northbound empty grain trains heading from Winston-Salem towards the plains in the west. We are north of the newly restored station near the Winding Way Road crossing. The first train to pass is NS Grain Train 51Z. This train runs as needed during the fall harvest rush from Winston-Salem to the BNSF yard in North St. Louis, Missouri. The engine pulling the train toward Roanoke, Virginia is the Tribute Y62882, number 2133. Let's listen as the engine's rods clank as it rumbles north through Boone's Mill. This sound signals the return of NW steam to the main line. Next, we have another NS Grain Train 53Z operating from Winston-Salem. This train also runs as needed to Thomaston, Indiana. Today's engine is our first Tribute Class A 2664, number 1216. This locomotive represents the racehorse of mainline freight trains on the N&W. Built between 1936 and 1950, one, number 1218, still exists and is displayed in Roanoke, Virginia. It was recently added to the National Register of Historic Places. We will discuss its history later in this podcast. Let's listen to number 1216 thunder through Boone's Mill, taking NS53Z as far as Williamson, where diesel engines will take over. It is now 3:30 p.m. Night has fallen, and it's about 9 p.m. as we prepare to capture one more train on the Pumpkin Vine route tonight. At the Starlight Lane crossing in Wright, Virginia, we set out to emulate old Winston Link, who famously recorded nighttime sounds. The southbound steam train is the NS Manifest 18W, traveling from Mormon Yard in Bellevue, Ohio, to Winston-Salem. Another tribute Y62882 Giant number 2149 pulls the train. Everything falls silent for a moment, then the powerful sound of the train shatters the quiet as it passes right and disappears into the autumn night, heading southward. I can imagine Link's spirit watching over us as we recreate his work from the 1950s. After our last night in Roanoke, we'll begin our journey back to Michigan on Wednesday, October 15th. Before leaving, we'll make a final stop in Williamson to catch more sounds of N&W steam engines switching coal cars in the yard. These engines are moving loaded coal hoppers in preparation for delivery to customers across the state, the country, or even worldwide. The first 080 engine we see is Tribute number 206, followed by its next-in-class mate, number 248. Listen to these husky little engines switching hoppers years after their predecessors were retired. A memorable new moment in the Williamson yard. After a few minutes watching this activity, it's time to say goodbye and head back to Michigan after completing our second Norfolk and Western RS event. Although listening to the yard switching was tiring, we gained an exciting N&W mainline action bonus, hinting at what's next. In the next episode, we will return to Virginia and West Virginia to feature our first all N&W mainline operation on the Shenandoah Valley Line, and visit the towns of Williamson and Rowell, West Virginia for more action. To conclude, I thank Jay Winn, David Sadowski of the Trolley Dodger, James Ramsey, Clover House Productions, the Railroad Record Club, and Allan Sherry for their roles in creating or granting permission to use the sounds in this episode. I also credit my Aunt Elizabeth Tremblay for her diligent editing of my podcast scripts. I look forward to our next adventure. Nothing more needs to be said. I'm Alec Butler at Revival State. See you next time.